New South Wales and Queensland holding almost 85% of reported Australian Yowie sightings, Victoria had always paled in comparison. That was until recently, when there was an upturn in reports from central Victoria and the outskirts of the Alpine region. Contrary to popular belief, the mountainous Alpine region of the Victorian GDR, Great Dividing Range, is even more expansive than the Blue Mountains and the Wollemi National Park west of Sydney, but with fewer human inhabitants. Less people means less sightings, but no less Yowies. In fact, there could be far more Yowies living in the Victorian High Country than the Blue Mountains, but not as many people to encounter or report them. Circa 1965, a man by the name of John Lovick had a life-changing physical encounter with the Yowie in the Victorian Alps. Featuring on Charlie Lovick's YouTube channel, his brother John talks of a night a Yowie entered the King Billy hut on Lovick's Mountain, where he was sleeping. He was woken by a pair of hairy hands clasping his neck. Here's a little of John Lovick recounting what transpired that night in 1965.
Sometime during the night, I got woken up. I felt there was something wrong. And then I felt a pair of hands around my neck. And I thought, oh no, this is not right. I'm not awake. And these hands, they tightened on my neck. And I thought, this is real, this is happening. I sat up in bed, and as I did, I instinctively put my arms out to knock this thing off my neck. And all I could feel when I put my arms up was hair, strong hair, not fur. I just jumped up and forced myself up to force this thing off my body. In doing so, I fell out of the top bunk, I hit the floor, and this thing hit the floor with me. In the meantime, the door was open. The old man never ever shut a door in this hut. Now, I hit the floor, everyone woke up, but I was absolutely screaming. I was petrified. With all my screaming, I didn't see anything. I couldn't focus on anything. The two guys sleeping on the floor later tell me what they seen. But this thing, whatever it was, went out the door, and the silhouette of the moonlight, they could see that it filled the width of the door, and it was on two legs. It walked. It didn't bound on four, it walked out on two legs, and they reckon that it was half the height of the doorway. Now, the dogs outside, with the noise that happened in here, they bristled and they growled and they barked, and they were savage, absolutely savage. The old man got up, he got his torch. I said, oh, something bloody had me, something had me. Oh, he said, you having a nightmare? I said, no, something had me. He went outside, and the dogs are going crazy. They'd raced out, and he sooled them onto him. He said, get them, boys, get them. Sooled them on. They'd go out a little bit further, and they'd come back right beside his feet, and they'd just sit there with their bristles up, snarling. They would not leave his side. They wouldn't go out. One of the blokes was looking at me, and he said, well, John, what's wrong with your neck? He said, you got marks all over it. And then they all had a look, and there was impressions of overgrown nails from two hands clasped around my neck.
Luckily, Mr. Lovick didn't encounter one of the big ones, or he might not be here to talk about it. Interestingly, in September of 1976, a man by the name of George Gray is reported in the Herald Sun and Macleay Argus of an event that occurred 8 years prior, of a remarkably similar story. Mr. Gray, a timber cutter, was sleeping in a hut bordering a nearby sawmill in the GDR 80 kilometres west of Kempsey. At 1 a.m, he was woken by a 4-foot Yowie trying to drag him from his bed as he slept. A 10-minute battle ensued before the Yowie gave up the fight and disappeared back into the forest, leaving Mr. Gray with a never-ending mental scar that he took to the grave. He was told by the mill manager to keep things quiet about the ordeal, in case the other workers boycotted the area. For both Mr. Lovick and Mr. Gray, these were life-changing experiences. For many Yowie witnesses, the memory will stay in your mind forever. Below the New South Wales and Victorian border and surrounding the Lovick's Mountain, various other Yowie sightings have been reported to the AYR. Aberfeldy and Thompson Dam, to the west at Healesville, Bemambra, Gingera and Bem River to the east. The modern day reports steadily continue to grow for the Victorian GDR, but pale in comparison to the New South Wales highlands where the reports were being documented since the mid-1800s. From one dramatic encounter from John Lovick in 1965 to another on the next mountain range in more recent years. Reach for a warm jacket and a hot cup of tea, because welcome to Mt Hotham.
So we're really big enthusiasts of the high country. We've spent countless hours up there. We have or had a goal to hike the entire Great Alpine Trail from start to finish. And that takes about 2 months to do in one go. So in the meantime, before we sort of got to that point, we'd just been doing parts of it. And we really love all the huts in the high country. We've been to many. So we planned to leave on Friday after work and head up. So we knew we'd be setting up in the dark, but we were heading to JB Hut. So we knew it wasn't too far off the road and it wasn't a big hike in. It was only maybe 400 metres. We left. He drove the first half. I drove the second half. So we hit Harrietville and it was about 2 degrees. And I said, look, I'm going to go really slow. Pre-snow season, there was some snow around. So I said, look, it could be icy, so I'm just going to go slow. I don't know if you know Hotham, but first you go round and round and round and round, and then you hit sort of open spaces and it's pretty flat as you head towards the resort. So we would have been maybe 3/4 of the way going round and round up the mountain. It was about 2 a.m. by the time we'd hit there. I'd veered around one of the corners. It was going towards the right. And there, very close to us, like very close, walking across the road mere meters, was this giant, like man. Like I thought it was a man. Like it was huge. It was the biggest thing I've ever seen. And it was blonde, long blonde hair, like a woman's hair. Face and chest didn't have hair on it, it was skin. But as it went down, it got hairier and hairier. And it was carrying a cowbell, because I can still remember the sound it made, that ding, 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 as it was walking. When we first spotted, it was only maybe 10 metres in front of us, and it was walking across the road from the left to the right. And it sort of looked at us, and we sort of looked at it, and I'd taken my foot off the accelerator, and we were just sort of, gliding along. And it wasn't fazed by us at all, just sort of moved out of the way for us, and we sailed past, and I said to my husband, what was that? And he was quite panicky. He was drive faster. Obviously, I took off, and about a K down the road, I said, oh, God, what did we just see? And he's like, I think we saw a Bigfoot. And really quite shocked, I suppose, about what we saw. So we came to JB Hut, we set up. We were going to stay in the hut that night, but there was other campers in there. So we set up and we were fine, slept till morning at the other campers. They moved on, we moved in. And we put it completely to the back of our mind. It was not something that had frightened us at that point or anything like that. It was just so surreal that I suppose our minds couldn't process what we'd seen. So we'd done a couple of hikes that Saturday. Same with Sunday. We sort of milled around on Sunday, just sort of had a look around Dinner Plain, gone to the falls there, that sort of thing. And that night it was meant to snow. So we said, let's hike to Hotham. And it's about 10 or so Ks from JB Hut. So we left that afternoon and headed up. We watched the sunset, had some dinner up there, a walk back. And so it was one of those beautiful, typical Alpine nights. It was still, it was crisp. It hadn't started to snow yet. And we were maybe only about 4 Ks away from JB Hut by this point, heading back. and it was pitch black. We were sort of walking quite quietly and just sort of chatting away. And I have quite a loud laugh, and my husband made me laugh. And I was on the side closest to the edge of the road. It was like we had startled something, and it was meters from me. And I just froze. And this sound that this made, we didn't see it at this point. We did not see it. And it was like this bellow, male, scream and a roar all at once. It sort of echoed around and around, and it went on and on. And I know my mind might be thinking, oh, it went for ages, but I froze. I actually couldn't move. I couldn't think. I was just focused on what was there, and it was so close to me. It would have been maybe 2 or 3 meters. And I was just paralyzed with fear. My husband actually had to push me behind him. And we both were just standing there waiting for something to happen. And then we heard all this crashing and banging and these footsteps that was just boom, boom, boom. And it was so loud, we couldn't tell if it was coming or going. So we were just frozen there. And once we sort of realised, okay, maybe it's moving away from us, my husband, without taking his eyes off where it was coming from, sort of turns his neck towards me and goes, run. So I am running and I am crying hysterically, and he is running, and we can still hear these footsteps, boom, boom. And I reckon we broke personal best that night. We were back to the hut so quick, got in, locked it, made sure all the shutters were locked. And we were just so freaked out. Neither of us wanted to leave, I suppose, the safety of the hut and go back outside, because we were debating whether to stay or go. And he said, look, at least we're in here. We had hunting knives with us. So we sort of, buckled in for the night. And nothing happened. But mind you, at 3 o'clock in the morning, there was this banging on the door. I'm like, oh, God, sort of clutching onto it. It's back. And it was just a possum. Since then, we've never camped back in the high country. We have not gone camping. We've not gone to any of the huts. We have avoided going to Hotham. Even snowboarding, it's like, no, we just can't do it. My husband's a big guy, and I've never seen him be afraid. In all our years of marriage and dating, I've never seen him be afraid. And he was terrified. We've only spoken really about it a couple of times since it happened. It's been, 6 years or something. And, yeah, we've never really talked about it. He just doesn't want to even bring it up. He's like, no. Yeah, so I guess that's what our story was.
That would have been absolutely terrifying.
Yep.
Take me back to when you first spotted the golden blonde creature, whatever you want to call it. You said it walked across the road from left to right. Did it turn to look at you? Did you see a face?
It did. Sort of had hair that was sort of not like a fringe, but it had on its forehead, like, I guess you could call it, I would say, like a Labrador's coat, but mainly just on the outskirts of the face, that really heavy set brow, like early man, that kind of look. I watched as it walked across the road, but I was focusing road, it. It had a very, very human face. I suppose all the information out there about Bigfoot, it's like, oh, it's like a walking gorilla, or it did not look like that at all, which was so surprising.
So it looked more
human,
more human than gorilla.
Yeah, 100%. Parts of its face did not have hair or fur or anything like that. It was actual skin.
Did you see the colour of the skin?
Like human skin, like a white person's human skin.
Did you catch whether it was kind of leathery or wrinkled?
No.
Did the face move at all when it looked at you? So did it move its mouth or its eyes?
It turned its head to look at us, and it was just no emotion, nothing. It was not fazed by us at all. I suppose, you hear of them running away and that sort of thing, not wanting to be seen. It was so nonchalant about it. It just didn't care.
Get the feeling that it was male or female?
I would say male, but again, that's just a guess. There was no visible genitalia or breasts or anything like that. I would say male, probably just because of how calm it was seeing humans. Like it was a bit braver.
And you reckoned it was about 7 foot tall.
Oh, 7, 8 feet. Like it was huge.
What about across the shoulders? Could you get a feel for how wide it was?
Would have been 3 feet. It was really broad. Now, my husband's quite broad and he would have looked like a child next to it.
Was it wide at the shoulders and narrower at the waist area, or was it the same thickness all the way up and down?
No, it was definitely narrower. Not, ridiculously narrow, but it sort of followed that human male triangle shape.
You caught sight of this in your headlights because it's 2 a.m. in the morning. Were you able to catch any eye shine or reflection or colour from the eyes?
No.
What about the arms?
Just swinging along like how we would walk. They seemed to take a lot longer to swing. It was carrying a cowbell on this really crude-looking rope. And I suppose that's where my focus was a lot, because it was just ringing it. Not like it was intentionally ringing, but it was just swinging it and it was ringing. And I can still hear that sound. And it just had these giant hands that were holding it, like just curled around. It was huge. And this is one of those, I'm talking those old-fashioned looking cowbells.
With that really recognisable sound.
Yeah, yep.
I have not heard that before. One carrying a cowbell, that's really interesting. They wouldn't be that hard to come across. Lots of farmers out there have cowbells on their cattle, usually on the lead cow.
It looked quite old.
And did you notice the feet when it was crossing the road?
Yeah, bare feet and again skin. They didn't have any fur or anything on them.
What about the stride? Was there a long distance between footsteps?
Yeah. It took maybe 2 or 3 to cross the entire road, across 2 lanes. This big, giant, slow-moving step. He didn't increase his speed or anything for us. Nothing. It wasn't like a hurry to move out of the way of the car. We sort of were slowing down. Giant, very slow, big steps right across the road.
And it just walked into the forest from there and you couldn't see it after that?
No, it had come up and across and it just stood there as we drove past.
And did you catch a glimpse of it in the rear view mirror on the way? Was it too hard to see?
It got dark very quick, obviously without headlights there, but I know my husband was keeping an eye on, make sure nothing followed us.
That would have been quite mind-bending to see something like that all of a sudden, huh?
It is because, and I don't want to sound, rude or anything, but I mocked people who thought, Bigfoot was real or mermaids or things like that. I mocked them. I was one of those people that sort of scoffed at them. How wrong I am. How wrong I am.
They're out there. And if they're out there, what else is out there?
I know. And the thing is, I sit there and go, why isn't this common knowledge? Why is it's a big, silly secret? There should be signs up warning people. After our second encounter, that was my takeaway from the whole weekend. Why isn't this known about and why aren't people able to protect themselves?
You're not the first person to say that either. I've had quite a few people say there need to be signs, particularly in hotspots, that like the Pilliga in New South Wales. I've had a couple of people say that there should be signs up there because we have the frequency of sightings and encounters. Well, sure, the government does know about it.
They couldn't not.
They couldn't not. We have spoken to police officers, we've spoken to people in the army, park rangers. A lot of people know that they're out there.
My husband and I have spoken about that, and he sort of seems to think if that came out and the government said, oh, yes, these are real, it would completely destroy people's trust in government.
It would also have a big impact on forestry industry like logging, mining. You'd have so many idiots out there with guns trying to shoot them and end up shooting each other.
Yeah.
There are lots of reasons why I think the government would want to keep them secret. Can that be balanced by the danger that people are in? They're clearly way bigger, way stronger than us. They could snap us like a toothpick. couple of nights later and you guys were hiking back at night time back to the hut. Can you describe that scream, that roar for me again?
It's not a sound that I've ever heard or ever heard since. And I've heard bears, I've heard lions, I've heard all sorts of things, and it's nothing like that. It's nothing. It's its own sound. It's got a human element to it, like a man's scream, but it's also like a bellow and a roar. It's all of that at once, and it is incredibly loud. It is frightening. That sound is frightening because it's not a sound your brain can associate with anything. So it's this, what is that sort of thing going on? Yeah, I never want to hear it again. It's all three at once. You can definitely hear a human element to it, but more beastie.
Going back to that creature that you saw just briefly, what did it most resemble to you?
I would say early man, a very early man. That was, I suppose, my first thought of what it was. And my husband's like, we saw a Bigfoot. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, oh, is that what we saw? But, yeah, I would say like an early man, but huge and much hairier, sort of obviously heading down its body. It got hairier and hairier. And it had blonde hair, long shoulder length blonde hair.
Was the hair the same length all the way up and down the body, or was it shorter in some parts?
No, the hair was long, like a woman's hair. As it went down, it got heavier, but I'd say about the same, maybe a couple of inches long. The hair was woman-like.
Did you get a feeling of how old it might be?
No.
You hear this terrifying, raw scream sound that you've never heard before. You said you felt so frightened that you couldn't move, you couldn't think.
No, nothing.
Just frozen.
Just frozen. And I've never felt that before. So watching, fixated on where it's coming from, you don't think about anything. There's no, and that's, I suppose, when people go, why don't you take a photo or things like that. You aren't capable of doing anything at that point in time. You are frozen, actual frozen. And like I said, my husband had to move me away because I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't do anything to protect myself. And I think that all you are aware of is that you're going to die and you're just frozen with fear.
Exactly the same thing happened to Dean Harrison. One of his many encounters involved hearing that sound but feeling all of a sudden almost paralysed.
Yeah.
And having to mentally force himself just to move his head a bit and move his shoulders a bit. It was a huge effort.
I couldn't have done that. He's much better than I am. I couldn't have done that. I had to be moved.
Absolutely terrifying. You reckon it was just a couple of metres away but behind the shrubs so you couldn't see anything?
It was pitch black. We had torches, but they were in our backpack. We don't normally walk with torches at night, and quite frankly, we've never had a reason to. The worst you come across, I suppose, in the high country is the occasional deer. And again, they're not, but it's quite shrubby where we were. The road ends and then straight away it's shrubs. And it was in there. And I was on the road edge, like walking on the last bit of the asphalt. That's where I was walking. From the sound that it made, it was so close. If I'd reached my arm out and it had reached its arm out, we would have touched.
You and your husband managed to turn around and run. What did it do then? You weren't even sure if it was running towards you or running away from you initially.
Yeah, because it was so heavy, those footsteps, and so loud that you can't decipher if it's coming towards you or going away. Not like, I suppose, anything else, a person or an animal. You can understand sort of, I suppose, which direction it's going. You couldn't. It was just that loud and booming. It took, several seconds to realise, it's actually getting less. It's moving away. And that's when my husband said, okay, run. And we did. Even starting to run, even when we were running, you could still hear those footsteps as it was running. I'm not saying that it was running after us or parallel to us, but they were so loud that it sounded like it was still near us.
Just before you hear that scream, the roar, did you notice the footsteps first?
No, the scream was first.
That scream first and then it started running?
Yep.
And you weren't sure initially if it was towards you or away, but then it does start moving away.
Yep.
How long do you reckon you and your husband stood there?
Again, when you go through that moment of paralysed fear, you're not aware of time. You're not aware of how long something's going for or how long you're standing there. I would say the whole encounter probably took less than maybe a minute or two. But I suppose my brain thinks that it went for much longer. It was only probably maximum only a minute from the moment we heard it to the moment we were running. So it was not long.
You and your husband get back to the hut that you were staying in, JB's hut, did you say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
at JB's plane.
What did you say to each other when you got there?
We just went into sort of action mode by that point. We were locking everything out, getting the knives out. We were ready, and we were discussing whether or not to stay. Without having seen it that time, we knew what it was. We just knew what that sound was and what those big footsteps were. It was clearly bipedal. So we knew obviously what it was. It was close to where we saw it the night before or the couple of nights before. And so we were just like, do we stay? Do we go? And even he didn't want to go out to the car because from the hut to the car where the car was parked, it's about 400 metres. And we knew we'd have to probably do a trip or two. And we didn't want to do that. It was like, no, we'll just stay indoors. So that's what we did.
And you had heard about Bigfoot Yowies before?
Yes, like only sort of briefly. Like you hear about these things and you see, the shows on TV saying, oh, there's documented sightings or, those sorts of things. But I'd never read up on them or anything like that. I'd sort of put it down to some sort of, silly folklore, conspiracy theory, whatever you want to call it. I'd put it in that basket, like someone's a little bit silly or pulling a big prank. I think that's why it was so shocking for me is that, oh, my God, these are actually real. This isn't something someone's, making up to get money or fame or whatever I thought that they did it for. They're actually real.
That must have been quite a shock to you.
It is shocking. It's not something that your brain can ever get around. And even to this day, we still can't believe what happened. Not in a million years. And we've never talked about it outside of ourselves. So I suppose you're the first person that we've spoken about it with. And it's something that we know that we wouldn't talk about it to people. We're both, professionals and like I can't imagine telling my colleagues or anything like that. I'd be mocked.
It's really unfortunate. As you said, it's important that we talk about this subject so more and more people know what's out there and the potential danger of what's out there.
Yeah.
Brave people come forward and then they get mocked by family and friends. You were one of those people who mocked other people for believing in creatures. A lot of people find it really hard to believe. You don't go hiking, camping up in the high country anymore?
Nope. And what's really sad is that was, a big common goal we had and neither of us want to do it now. I suppose my husband's like, oh, what are the chances that it will happen again? And I was like, well, what are the chances that it happened, like, in the first place? Like, what are the chances that we'd ever see one? I don't think either of us are game enough. And it's really sad because we sort of imagined that when we had kids, we'd take them up all the time and it'll be great hiking and all the life experience they would get from that. We have not even considered taking the kids up there ever. Just think now it's too dangerous. And, it's a shame because we've lost that part of ourselves and it was a big part. We would spend so many weeks up in the high country every year and now we just don't